Unassuming Timothy Abernathy had truly mastered blending into the background at Crestwood Academy. Skinny as a rail, with shaggy, sandy-colored hair perpetually obscuring his pale blue eyes, he habitually kept his gaze fixed on the floor as he navigated the crowded halls, practically unseen. His threadbare jacket made a soft swishing noise against his thin frame as he shuffled between classrooms and swarms of talking students. Timothy had only enrolled at Crestwood 4 months prior when his father secured a position at the local fire department. Initiating junior year at a new establishment was challenging on its own, but Timothy bore extra baggage that rendered him an easy target. His attire was purchased from discount outlets, his midday meal consisted of whatever leftovers he could pack from home, and his timid disposition made him appear vulnerable to those who thrived on intimidation. The initial occasion, Bartholomew "Bart" Sterling noticed Timothy. It was in the quadrangle during the 3rd week of classes. Bart towered at nearly 6'3", with a physique sculpted by years of baseball, his dark brown hair meticulously groomed, and his designer clothing branding him as one of the elite. He controlled his section of the social pyramid with an iron will, encircled by his devoted cronies who guffawed at his every remark and participated in his vile games. "Take a gander at that pitiful excuse for a human," Bart had murmured to his posse, gesturing toward Timothy, who sat by himself at a distant picnic table, silently munching on a cheese sandwich. "I'd wager he's never even spoken to a woman." Leonard "Lenny" Carmichael, Bart's chief lackey, chuckled while adjusting his Letterman sweater. With his burly stature and perpetual smirk, Lenny functioned as Bart's muscle, consistently prepared to escalate arguments from verbal to physical confrontation. Probably never thrown a punch either. Look how frail he is. The third member of their faction, Franklin "Frankie" Poole, was shorter than the others, but compensated with inventive cruelty in his tormenting techniques. His red hair was cropped short, and his hazel eyes held a calculating iciness that unnerved even some instructors. "We ought to extend a proper welcome to the new arrival," Frankie suggested with a sinister grin. Their preliminary approach was subtle, deliberately jostling Timothy in the corridors, uttering remarks loud enough for him to overhear and ensuring he felt unwelcome wherever he went. Timothy tolerated it silently, keeping his eyes down and proceeding to his classes. He had realized long ago that retaliating only exacerbated the situation, and he had secrets that compelled him to remain unnoticed. What none of them comprehended was that Timothy originated from a lineage with extraordinary talents. His grandfather had possessed empathic capabilities that he'd concealed his entire life, and his father displayed sporadic surges of the same gift during episodes of severe distress. Timothy had always felt different, encountering peculiar sensations when his emotions surged, but he'd learned to suppress these sentiments following a childhood occurrence that had frightened his relatives. The tormenting escalated gradually over the ensuing weeks. In the science lab, Bart would accidentally spill chemicals on Timothy during experiments, sending him scrambling to clean up the mess while other pupils snickered. In the hallways, Lenny would shove him against vending machines, causing his notebooks to spill and compelling him to rush to gather them before the next bell. Frankie specialized in psychological manipulation, spreading rumors about Timothy's family facing eviction and ensuring everyone knew he received reduced lunches. Mr. Abernathy, Timothy's history teacher, noticed the indicators but felt impotent to intervene without irrefutable proof. He observed as Timothy grew more withdrawn, his participation in classroom discussions diminishing to zero. Other instructors overlooked the blatant harassment, either preoccupied with their own duties or unwilling to challenge the well-liked pupils whose parents donated generously to the institution. The breaking point materialized on a brisk Wednesday morning in early November. Timothy had remained after class to utilize the library's computer for an assignment, understanding his family couldn't afford broadband access at home. As he traversed the deserted halls toward the main entrance, he detected footsteps resonating behind him. His stomach plummeted as he recognized the voices. Bart, Lenny, and Frankie were shadowing him. "Yo, Abernathy!" Bart hollered, his voice echoing off the trophy cases. "Where do you think you're scooting off to in such a hurry?" Timothy accelerated his pace, but the three boys effortlessly overtook him near the front vestibule. The corridor was empty, most students and staff having departed for the day. Dim lighting cast extended shadows, cultivating an ambiance of isolation and vulnerability. "We've been keeping tabs on you, weirdo," Lenny sneered, obstructing Timothy's path to the exit. "Always lurking around, acting like you're superior to everyone else." "I just desire to return home," Timothy mumbled quietly, his voice barely audible. He could sense something stirring deep within him, a familiar warmth that caused his palms to perspire. He suppressed it, the manner he'd been taught since childhood. Frankie advanced closer, his icy eyes sparkling with malicious intent. "That's not how things function. You see, you've been slighting us by ignoring us, and that's simply unacceptable." Bart cracked his knuckles menacingly. "We attempted to be cordial, to welcome you to our campus, but you just kept scurrying away. That was impolite." Timothy recoiled against the wall, cornered between the three boys and the brick barriers. His heart raced as he felt the familiar pressure accumulating behind his eyes, the identical sensation he'd encountered as a youngster when his emotions spiraled out of control. He closed his eyes and concentrated on remaining composed, on confining the peculiar energy where it couldn't inflict harm on anyone. "Look at him," Lenny guffawed, misinterpreting Timothy's closed eyes as fear. "I believe he's on the verge of tears." "Perhaps he requires something to truly furnish him a motive to weep," Frankie proposed, reaching into his duffel bag. What he extracted made Timothy's blood freeze, a silver metallic instrument with a glowing tip that emitted a low hum. "Where did you procure that?" Bart inquired, impressed despite himself. "My uncle works at a welding shop. He won't even notice it's gone," Frankie retorted, activating a switch that made the plasma torch hiss menacingly. "I've been itching to test this out on someone." Timothy opened his eyes wide with dread. "Please don't. I won't disclose this to anyone, I promise. Just permit me to go home." "Too late for that," Bart declared, seizing Timothy by the collar. "Hold him in place, Lenny." Lenny grabbed Timothy's arms while Bart pinned him against the lockers. Timothy struggled desperately, but he was no match for their combined strength. The pressure inside his head intensified, accompanied by a peculiar ringing sensation that seemed to pulsate through his entire being. "This is going to be entertaining," Frankie stated, approaching with the plasma torch raised. "I wonder how loud you'll shriek." "Stop, please," Timothy pleaded, but his entreaties only appeared to encourage them. Frankie pressed the torch against Timothy's chest and squeezed the trigger. Intense heat surged through Timothy's body, causing him to writhe violently against the lockers. But instead of the anticipated screams of agony, something else transpired entirely. The searing pain didn't merely traverse through Timothy. It appeared to ignite something that had been dormant within him. The meticulously controlled energy he'd devoted years suppressing abruptly erupted outward like a volcanic eruption. Every sprinkler head in the corridor activated simultaneously, showering the four boys with icy water. The metal lockers commenced to buckle and twist, their doors swinging open with deafening booms. Bart and Lenny released Timothy in shock, stumbling backward as the linoleum beneath their feet commenced to crack and heave. Timothy stood against the lockers, no longer the terrified victim, but something far more formidable. His eyes had shifted, glowing with an unnatural crimson light, and the air surrounding him appeared to ripple with unseen power. "What in the world?" Bart began to utter, but his words were cut off as an unseen force lifted him off his feet and hurled him against the opposite wall. He slid down to the floor, gasping for air and staring at Timothy in astonishment. Lenny attempted to flee, but the heavy front doors slammed shut before he could reach them. He tugged frantically at the handle, but it wouldn't budge, as if fused in place. Behind him, the sound of metal groaning filled the air as the lockers continued to bend and warp under the influence of Timothy's unleashed ability. Frankie still clutched the plasma torch, but his hands were trembling as he watched his companions being tossed around by an invisible force. "This isn't feasible," he whispered, retreating from Timothy. "This can't be genuine." Timothy advanced a step, and with each movement, the intensity of the supernatural energy intensified. Ceiling panels commenced to plummet around them, and the fluorescent light fixtures swayed precariously overhead. His voice, when he ultimately spoke, carried a resonance that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within the earth itself. "You desired to witness me break," Timothy articulated, his words echoing unnaturally in the devastated corridor. "You desired to see me afraid and helpless." Lenny was pressed against the locked door, tears streaming down his face as he felt an overwhelming pressure squeezing him from all directions. "Timothy, please, we're sorry, we didn't intend it." Bart struggled to rise, utilizing the wall for support, but unseen hands persisted in pushing him back down. His designer clothing was torn, and blood trickled from a gash on his forehead where he'd struck the concrete blocks. "This is ludicrous. Individuals can't accomplish this." "You're correct," Timothy responded, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Ordinary individuals can't accomplish this, but you just discovered that I'm not ordinary." Frankie made a desperate effort to utilize the plasma torch again, lunging forward with the instrument extended, but it soared from his hands before he could make contact. The torch sailed through the air and embedded itself in the water fountain 30 feet away, its silver casing shattering from the impact. Timothy raised his hand, and all three boys were elevated simultaneously into the air. They floated helplessly, their feet dangling several feet off the ground, held in place by the sheer force of his will. The fear in their eyes was complete now. The identical terror they had inflicted on others for years reflected back at them tenfold. "For months, you've rendered my existence miserable," Timothy persisted, his voice steady despite the overwhelming power flowing through him. "You've humiliated me, injured me, and made me dread attending school every single day." "We'll cease," Bart pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "We'll leave you in peace. We'll never harass you again." "You'll accomplish more than that," Timothy stated, lowering them until their feet touched the ground, but keeping them pinned against the wall with unseen force. "You're going to comprehend what it feels like to be powerless." One by one, Timothy commenced to demonstrate the extent of his abilities. Lenny's designer sneakers were ripped from his feet and twisted into unrecognizable forms. Frankie's meticulously styled hair was mussed by unseen hands, leaving him appearing disheveled and vulnerable. Bart's Letterman sweater was stripped away and shredded, the pieces scattered across the debris-covered floor. But Timothy didn't cease with their possessions. Utilizing his empathic powers with surgical precision, he commenced to provide them a taste of the physical intimidation they had dished out for so long. Bart discovered himself being lifted and spun in circles until he was dizzy and nauseous. Lenny was pressed against the lockers with the identical force they had utilized to pin Timothy, feeling metal edges dig into his back. Frankie was lifted high into the air and held there, experiencing the vertigo and helplessness of being completely at someone else's mercy. "Please halt," Frankie whimpered, suspended near the ceiling and glancing down at the devastation below. "I'm going to be sick." "Now you comprehend how I felt every single day," Timothy retorted, but there was no malice in his voice anymore, only a cold, calculated justice. "The distinction is, I'm not a monster like you." He gently lowered Frankie to the ground, though he kept all three boys restrained against the wall. The supernatural energy surrounding Timothy commenced to subside slightly, the crimson glow in his eyes dimming to a more normal intensity. The rumbling in the building ceased, and the remaining intact lights flickered back to a steady glow. "Here's what's going to transpire," Timothy announced, his voice returning to its normal tone, but carrying an authority that hadn't been there before. "You're going to inform everyone at campus precisely what transpired here tonight. You're going to concede that you've been tormenting me and that I defended myself." "No chance," Bart protested weakly. "No one will believe this absurd narrative anyway." Timothy smiled for the initial time in months, but it wasn't a kind expression. With a subtle gesture, he caused one of the destroyed lockers to buckle further, the metal screaming in protest. "Do you genuinely desire to test me on that?" Bart's defiance crumbled instantly. Okay, we'll disclose to them whatever you desire. I desire you to disclose to them the truth," Timothy corrected, "that you three have been terrorizing an innocent pupil, and that when you escalated to utilizing a weapon on me, you discovered that some confrontations aren't worth initiating." Lenny, still pressed against the wall, nodded frantically. "Yes, we'll inform everyone. We'll ensure they know we were mistaken. And you'll ensure no one else gets tormented at this establishment," Timothy continued, the unseen force holding them commencing to ease slightly. "You'll utilize your influence to safeguard other pupils instead of harming them." Frankie, back on solid ground but still unable to move freely, glanced around at the devastation surrounding them. Shattered glass, twisted metal, fallen ceiling panels, and damaged walls bore testament to the incredible power that had been unleashed. "How is this even feasible? How long have you been capable of accomplishing this?" Timothy considered the question, recalling years of suppressing his abilities, of residing in fear of what he might unintentionally accomplish if he lost control. "I've always been different. My family instructed me to conceal it, to never permit anyone to know what I could accomplish. But you three decided to introduce weapons into this, and that altered everything." The realization of what they had awakened commenced to sink in. Bart glanced around at the demolished corridor, comprehending that this level of destruction could have been turned on them personally if Timothy had chosen to be truly vindictive. "We could have been killed," he whispered. "Yes," Timothy agreed simply. "But I'm not you. I don't relish injuring individuals who can't defend themselves." Slowly, Timothy released his empathic hold on the three boys. They slumped against the wall, their legs shaky from the adrenaline and terror of the past several minutes. None of them made any attempt to flee or continue their assault. The fight had been completely extracted from them. "Return home," Timothy instructed, shouldering his duffel bag. "Ponder what transpired here tonight. Ponder all the other pupils you've injured over the years. And tomorrow, you commence making it right." As Timothy traversed toward the exit door, it swung open for him without any visible mechanism. He paused in the doorway and glanced back at his former tormentors, who were still staring at him in amazement and fear. "And if you ever touch another pupil the manner you touched me," he added quietly, "recall what you've witnessed here tonight, because next time I might not be so merciful." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Bart, Lenny, and Frankie alone in the devastated corridor. For several minutes, none of them spoke, each processing what they had witnessed and experienced. The silence was broken only by the occasional sound of settling debris and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Word of the incident spread through Crestwood Academy like wildfire over the next few days, though the narrative altered with each telling. Some pupils claimed there had been a gas explosion that caused widespread damage to the west hallway. Others whispered about a brawl that had gotten out of control, resulting in property destruction and injuries. But Bart, Lenny, and Frankie kept their promise to Timothy. In a surprising turn of events, they summoned an assembly where they publicly conceded to months of tormenting behavior and formally apologized not just to Timothy, but to several other pupils they had targeted over the years. Their confession shocked the student body and faculty, many of whom had suspected the tormenting but had never witnessed the three well-liked pupils assume responsibility for their actions. The damaged corridor was quickly repaired over the weekend, with the administration attributing the destruction to a plumbing malfunction caused by aging pipes. No questions were asked about how such a malfunction could have caused lockers to bend and twist into impossible shapes, or why the damage seemed to radiate outward from one specific location. Timothy noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. Pupils who had previously ignored him now nodded respectfully in the hallways. Instructors smiled at him more often and seemed genuinely interested in his academic progress. Even pupils he'd never spoken to commenced including him in conversations and inviting him to sit with them at lunch. The transformation in Bart, Lenny, and Frankie was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire situation. Stripped of their cruel swagger and compelled to confront the consequences of their actions, they commenced to genuinely reform their behavior. Bart started utilizing his natural leadership abilities to organize anti-tormenting initiatives. Lenny channeled his protective instincts into defending younger pupils who were being picked on. Even Frankie, with his sharp intelligence, commenced tutoring struggling classmates instead of discovering new methods to torment them. 6 weeks following the incident, Timothy was traversing to his bicycle after school when Bart approached him alone. The former bully looked nervous but determined, his hands shoved deep in his pockets as he struggled to discover the appropriate words. "Timothy," Bart commenced hesitantly, "I comprehend we already apologized publicly, but I desired to converse with you privately too." Timothy paused, his keys in his hand, and studied Bart's face for any sign of the old hostility. What he saw instead was genuine remorse and something that might have been respect. "What did you desire to articulate?" Timothy inquired, his voice neutral but not unfriendly. Bart took a deep breath before continuing. "I desired you to know that what transpired that night, it altered everything for me. Not just because of what you could accomplish, but because of what you chose not to accomplish." Timothy waited silently for him to continue. "You could have genuinely injured us," Bart went on, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "With that kind of power, you could have placed us in the hospital or worse. But you didn't. You taught us a lesson instead of just obtaining vengeance, and that articulates something about who you are as a person. Everyone deserves an opportunity to be superior to what they were," Timothy responded simply. Bart nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Lenny, Frankie, and I have been conversing about that a lot lately. We squandered so many years being awful to individuals who didn't deserve it. We can't retract that, but we can attempt to improve going forward." The two young men stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on how dramatically their relationship had altered. The late afternoon sun cast extended shadows across the nearly deserted parking lot, and somewhere in the distance, the sounds of after-school activities drifted on the autumn breeze. "For what it's worth," Bart added, "I'm pleased you're at our campus now. Things are superior with you here." As Timothy rode home that afternoon, he reflected on the peculiar turns his existence had taken. For 16 years, he had resided in fear of his abilities, convinced that they rendered him dangerous and different in methods that would never be accepted. His family had instructed him to suppress his gifts, to conceal them from a world that wouldn't comprehend. But the confrontation with his bullies had instructed him something important about power and responsibility. His empathic abilities weren't merely a burden to be concealed, they were a portion of who he was, and like any tool, their morality depended entirely on how they were utilized. The incident had compelled him to make a choice about what kind of person he desired to be. He could have utilized his powers for revenge, to become a bully himself with supernatural abilities that no one could resist. Instead, He had chosen to utilize them as a teaching tool, to create understanding rather than just fear. Timothy realized that the genuine victory hadn't been demonstrating his hidden strength. It had been displaying mercy when he could have chosen violence. By refusing to become the monster his tormentors had attempted to make him, he had not only freed himself from their persecution, but had actually assisted them in becoming better individuals. As he pulled into his driveway, Timothy made a silent promise to himself. He would never again conceal from who he was or apologize for the gifts he had been given, but he would also never utilize those gifts to harm innocent individuals or to gain unfair advantages over others. Walking into his house, Timothy found his father waiting for him in the kitchen, his eyes filled with concern and knowing. He had sensed the change in him. The manner, the suppressed energy that had always surrounded him had ultimately found balance and purpose. "Something transpired today," he said, not quite a question. Timothy sat down across from him and for the initial time in his life disclosed to his father everything about his abilities and what had transpired at campus. He watched as relief washed over his face. Relief that his son had ultimately found the courage to be himself and that he had chosen to utilize his power wisely. The days that followed brought a new normal to Crestwood Academy. Timothy continued to excel academically, but now he participated more actively in classroom discussions and social activities. He joined the chess club, where his quiet intelligence and thoughtful arguments earned him respect from both teammates and opponents. The three former bullies became some of his most unlikely allies, their public transformation serving as an inspiration to other pupils who had previously engaged in similar behavior. The campus's atmosphere grew noticeably more inclusive and supportive, with incidents of tormenting dropping dramatically as word spread about the consequences of targeting innocent pupils. Timothy never had to utilize his empathic abilities again in a confrontational setting. The knowledge that he possessed such power, combined with his demonstrated restraint in utilizing it, was enough to earn him a reputation as someone who commanded respect without demanding fear. Years later, as Timothy prepared to graduate as valedictorian, he would look back on that terrifying November morning as the moment his genuine existence commenced. The scared, hidden boy who had walked into Crestwood Academy had been transformed not by his supernatural abilities, but by his choice to utilize them responsibly. Standing at the podium to deliver his graduation speech, Timothy looked out at an audience that included Bart, Lenny, and Frankie, all of whom had become genuine friends and had earned their own redemption through years of altered behavior. His message to his fellow graduates was simple but profound. True strength comes not from the power to harm others, but from the wisdom to know when not to use that power at all. Character count 24176.